The morning sun cast long shadows across the bombed-out streets of Kandahar as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his tactical gear. His SEAL team had been tracking a high-value target for 3 weeks through the maze of destroyed buildings and abandoned compounds. The intel was solid, a weapons cache hidden somewhere in the old market district, guarded by remnants of a militant cell that had been causing havoc for months. Morrison's team of 6 moved like ghosts through the rubble-strewn alleyways. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos checked her rifle scope for the 10th time that morning, while Petty Officer Tommy Chen scanned the rooftops for snipers. The air hung thick with dust and the acrid smell of old explosives. Every step forward felt like walking into a trap. "Target building 2 clicks ahead," whispered Santos through the comm system. The structure loomed before them, a 3-story concrete shell that had taken a direct hit months earlier. Half the building had collapsed, leaving twisted metal beams jutting out like broken bones. Local intelligence suggested the weapons were stored in the basement levels, but something felt wrong about the whole operation. As they approached the perimeter, Morrison noticed fresh tire tracks in the dust. Someone had been here recently, and it wasn't the locals who had long since fled this dead zone. The tracks led directly to what remained of the building's main entrance, then disappeared into the shadows beyond. Chen spotted movement in a second-floor window, just a flash of fabric, but enough to confirm they weren't alone. The team spread out, taking defensive positions behind chunks of concrete and abandoned vehicles. Morrison's gut told him this was more than a simple weapons recovery mission. The way the building sat silent, too silent, made his skin crawl. "Sir, I'm picking up electronic signatures," Chen reported, monitoring his detection equipment. "Multiple devices active. This isn't just a storage facility." The readings showed sophisticated communication equipment, the kind used by organized military units, not scattered insurgents. Santos found something that made her blood run cold. Drag marks in the dust leading toward the building's rear entrance. The marks were fresh, maybe hours old, and they told a story of someone being pulled rather than walking. Morrison realized they might be walking into a hostage situation. The team's mission parameters suddenly felt inadequate. They were equipped for a quick in-and-out operation, not a complex rescue scenario. But backing down wasn't an option, not when civilians might be involved, and not when they were this close to what could be a major intelligence breakthrough. As Morrison signaled his team to advance, a sound drifted from somewhere deep within the building's bowels. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but distinctly human, a rhythmic tapping like someone trying to communicate in code. The sound was coming from underground, from spaces that supposedly didn't exist according to their building schematics. The morning heat was already becoming oppressive, but Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever they were about to encounter in that shattered building was far more significant than a simple weapons cache. The tapping sound continued, steady and deliberate, like a heartbeat refusing to stop despite everything around it being broken and dead. Santos caught Morrison's eye and nodded toward a partially collapsed stairwell that led down into darkness. The tapping was definitely coming from below. As they prepared to descend into the unknown, none of them could have imagined they were about to discover something that would change everything they thought they knew about their mission, their enemy, and the war itself. The building seemed to pulse with hidden life, and Morrison knew that whatever secrets lay buried beneath the ruins would test his team in ways they had never been tested before. The real mission was just beginning. The descent into the building's underground levels revealed a world that shouldn't have existed. Morrison led his team down concrete steps that were surprisingly intact, their tactical lights cutting through darkness that felt alive with secrets. The tapping sound grew stronger with each step downward, accompanied now by the distant hum of generators and ventilation systems. "This isn't on any of our blueprints," Santos whispered, running her hand along walls that were clearly reinforced with military-grade materials. The construction was professional, sophisticated, nothing like the crude tunnels typically used by insurgent groups. Someone had invested serious money and expertise in creating this underground complex. Chen's electronic detection equipment was going crazy. "Sir, I'm reading power sources, communication arrays, and what looks like a complete command center down here. This is a full-scale military installation." The readings suggested the facility extended far beyond the footprint of the building above, stretching under adjacent structures that had also been bombed into apparent uselessness. As they moved deeper, Morrison began to understand the tactical brilliance of the location. The destroyed building above provided perfect camouflage, discouraging investigation while concealing sophisticated operations below. It was the kind of strategic thinking that required advanced military training and significant resources. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, and Morrison's team froze at what they discovered. Along the walls were photographs, dozens of them, showing American military operations throughout the region. But these weren't intelligence photos taken from a distance. These were insider shots, taken by someone with access to classified briefings and operational details. These photos are from missions that haven't happened yet, Santos said, her voice tight with disbelief. She was looking at detailed reconnaissance images of targets they were scheduled to hit next week, complete with tactical assessments and troop movement plans. Someone had been feeding their operational intelligence to the enemy for months. The tapping sound suddenly stopped, replaced by footsteps echoing from deeper in the complex. Morrison signaled his team to take defensive positions as 3 figures emerged from the shadows. 2 were clearly local militants, but the third figure made Morrison's blood freeze. It was Master Chief Petty Officer David Reynolds, a decorated SEAL who had been declared missing in action 6 months earlier. Reynolds looked battered and exhausted, his uniform torn and dirty, but his eyes were alert and focused. He raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed, but his expression was complex. Relief mixed with something that looked like shame or fear. "Reynolds? What the hell are you doing here?" Morrison kept his weapon trained on the group, unsure whether he was looking at a rescue situation or something far more complicated. "It's not what you think, Morrison," Reynolds said quietly. "I've been undercover for months, trying to identify the leak in our intelligence network. These men have been helping me stay alive while I gathered evidence." One of the militants stepped forward, speaking in accented but clear English. "Your friend has been investigating the real enemy, the one who has been selling your military secrets to the highest bidder. We have been protecting him because we lost many of our people due to the same betrayal." Morrison's mind raced as he tried to process this information. If Reynolds was telling the truth, it meant someone with high-level access had been compromising American operations, getting soldiers killed and undermining the entire mission in the region. But it also meant the enemy he thought he was fighting wasn't the real enemy at all. Chen's equipment detected approaching vehicles above ground, multiple engines, moving fast toward their position. "Sir, we've got company coming. Multiple contacts, and they're not following standard approach protocols." Reynolds' expression shifted to urgent concern. "Morrison, you need to listen to me very carefully. The person who betrayed our operations knows you're here. This whole mission was designed to eliminate the evidence, and anyone who might have seen it. We're all in immediate danger." The sound of boots on the stairs above echoed through the chamber as unknown forces began their descent into the underground complex. Morrison realized that his team had walked into something much larger and more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The real war was about to begin, and the enemies might not be who anyone expected them to be. Morrison had to make a choice that would determine whether his team survived the next few minutes, and whether the truth about the intelligence leak would ever see daylight. The legendary SEAL they thought was dead was very much alive, but the secrets he carried might get them all killed. Morrison made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Santos, cover the stairs. Chen, help Reynolds secure that evidence. We're getting everyone out alive." The sound of approaching footsteps was getting closer, and Morrison could hear multiple voices coordinating their descent. Professional, military voices speaking in American English. Reynolds moved quickly to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a cache of documents, hard drives, and photographs. 6 months of evidence, he said, stuffing everything into a waterproof bag. Financial records, communications, operational details, everything needed to expose the entire network. "How many people are we talking about?" Morrison asked as he helped secure the materials. "At least 3 high-ranking officers at command level, plus support staff and contractors," Reynolds replied grimly. "They've been selling targeting information, troop movements, and tactical plans. The enemy always knew we were coming because someone was telling them." The militants who had been protecting Reynolds began opening hidden weapons caches along the chamber walls. To Morrison's surprise, the weapons were American military issue. Not captured equipment, but brand new gear that had never been deployed. Someone had been supplying them with top-quality armaments as part of the cover operation. "Contact. Santos called from her position covering the stairs. Muzzle flashes lit up the stairwell as incoming forces opened fire, but the weapons fire was controlled. Professional. These weren't random insurgents, but trained military operators. Chen established a defensive position and returned fire while monitoring his communication equipment. "Sir, I'm intercepting their communications. They're American contractors, and they're under orders to eliminate all witnesses and destroy all evidence." Morrison felt the full weight of the situation hit him. His own people, or at least people working for his government, were trying to kill him to cover up their crimes. The mission had been a setup from the beginning, designed to eliminate the evidence and silence anyone who might expose the truth. Reynolds handed Morrison a small device that looked like a standard military GPS unit. "This contains backup copies of everything. If we don't make it out, at least the evidence might survive. There's a dead drop location programmed in. Someone trustworthy will know what to do with it." The firefight intensified as more attackers descended into the complex. Morrison realized they were trapped underground with limited ammunition and no clear escape route, but Reynolds and his local allies knew the facility better than anyone. "There's another way out," one of the militants said, pointing toward what looked like a solid wall. "Emergency tunnel leads to the old sewer system, but it's partially collapsed, dangerous but passable." As they prepared to move, Morrison made a discovery that changed everything. Among the photographs Reynolds had gathered was a picture of his own commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Martinez, shaking hands with a known arms dealer. The timestamp showed the meeting had taken place just days before Morrison's team had been deployed on this mission. "Martinez is part of this?" Morrison asked, staring at the damning evidence. "She's not just part of it, she's running it," Reynolds confirmed. "The whole intelligence leak operation has been coordinated from the top. She sent you here knowing it was a trap, betting that eliminating you and your team would be worth the risk." Santos called for covering fire as she prepared to fall back from her position. The attackers were advancing methodically, using professional tactics and overwhelming firepower. Morrison knew they had maybe minutes before their defensive position became untenable. The local militants began opening the hidden tunnel entrance, revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. Water could be heard flowing somewhere in the distance, along with the echo of voices that suggested the tunnel system was extensive. "Move, move, move," Morrison ordered as Chen provided covering fire for their retreat. One by one they slipped into the tunnel as bullets sparked off the concrete walls behind them. As they crawled through the narrow passage, Morrison processed the reality of their situation. They were now fugitives from their own military, carrying evidence that could expose a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of command. The people who were supposed to be their allies were hunting them, and the only help they had was coming from former enemies who had their own reasons for wanting the truth exposed. Behind them, the sound of pursuit echoed through the tunnel system. Morrison knew that getting out alive was only the beginning. Now they had to survive long enough to get the evidence to someone who could act on it, someone who wasn't part of the conspiracy that had already cost so many lives. The tunnel system stretched for miles beneath the city, a forgotten network of drainage channels and maintenance passages that had been built decades earlier. Morrison's team moved through knee-deep water that smelled of industrial chemicals and decay, their tactical lights creating ghostly shadows on the curved concrete walls. Reynolds led the way with one of his local allies, a man named Hakim who seemed to know every twist and turn of the underground maze. "The contractors will assume we're heading for the extraction point," Reynolds explained as they navigated a junction where 4 tunnels met. "But Hakim knows routes that don't appear on any official maps." Chen monitored their electronic signatures, trying to stay ahead of the tracking technology their pursuers would be using. "Sir, I'm detecting drone activity above ground. They're mapping the tunnel entrances systematically. We need to keep moving." Santos brought up the rear, frequently checking behind them for signs of pursuit. The acoustics of the tunnel system made it difficult to determine distances, but she could occasionally hear voices and equipment echoing from somewhere in the network behind them. After an hour of difficult movement through the underground passages, they emerged into a larger chamber that served as a central hub for the drainage system. Hakim led them to a concealed alcove where emergency supplies had been cached: food, water, medical supplies, and communication equipment. "We've been preparing for this day for months," Hakim explained as he activated a secure radio system. "Many of our people died because of the information that was sold to our enemies. We want justice as much as you do." Reynolds used the communication equipment to contact someone outside the official military chain of command. Morrison listened as his fellow SEAL spoke in code to what sounded like a journalist or intelligence analyst in the United States. "The evidence is confirmed," Reynolds said into the radio. "Multiple sources, financial records, operational details. But we're compromised and need immediate extraction through unofficial channels." The response crackled through static, but Morrison caught enough to understand that help was being arranged through civilian contractors who weren't part of the conspiracy. A private extraction team would attempt to reach them within 24 hours, but they had to reach a specific location without being detected. Chen suddenly held up his hand for silence. His detection equipment was showing multiple heat signatures approaching their position through different tunnel routes. "They found us." Multiple teams coordinating their approach. Morrison realized they were facing a sophisticated military operation designed to eliminate them permanently. The contractors hunting them had resources, training, and technology that matched anything the SEAL teams could deploy. This wasn't just about covering up corruption. It was about protecting a criminal enterprise worth millions of dollars. "How many people have died because of this?" Morrison asked Reynolds as they prepared to move again. "Dozens of American soldiers, hundreds of civilians," Reynolds replied grimly. "Every mission that was compromised, every convoy that was ambushed, every base that was attacked with inside information, it all traces back to this network." Hakim's radio crackled with urgent messages in local dialect. After a brief conversation, he turned to Morrison with concerning news. "My contacts say the contractors have brought in additional support. They're sealing off all tunnel exits within a 5-mile radius." Morrison felt the tactical situation shifting against them. They were trapped underground with limited supplies, facing an enemy with superior numbers and resources. But Reynolds had survived 6 months in hostile territory by being smarter than his enemies, not stronger. "There's one route they won't expect," Reynolds said, studying a hand-drawn map of the tunnel system. "It leads through the old industrial district, but the passage is partially flooded and structurally unstable. Most people would consider it impassable." Santos checked her ammunition and equipment. "Most people aren't SEALs." The sound of approaching forces was getting closer, echoing through multiple tunnel passages. Morrison could hear tactical communications being coordinated in the distance, along with the splash of multiple teams moving through the water-filled passages. Chen picked up electronic signals that indicated their pursuers were using advanced tracking technology. "They're triangulating our position using passive heat detection and communication intercepts. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they pinpoint our exact location." Morrison made another critical decision. "We split up. Santos and Chen take the evidence and head for the extraction point through the safest route. Reynolds, Hakim, and I will create a diversion and lead them away through the dangerous passage." "Sir, we don't leave team members behind," Santos protested. "You're not leaving us behind, you're completing the mission," Morrison replied firmly.
"Getting that evidence to safety is more important than any of our individual survival." As they prepared to separate, Reynolds handed Morrison additional intelligence that he had been keeping in reserve.
"If something happens to us, make sure this gets to the right people. It contains the financial routing information that shows where the money trail leads. This conspiracy goes higher than we thought. It reaches into the Pentagon itself." The sound of pursuit was almost upon them as Morrison's team prepared to split up and face the most dangerous phase of their mission. The truth they carried was worth more than their lives, but they had to survive long enough to deliver it to people who could act on it. The separation was harder than Morrison had anticipated. Watching Santos and Chen disappear into the darkness of the eastern tunnel with the evidence felt like cutting away part of his soul. But Reynolds was right. Their best chance of success lay in dividing their pursuers' attention and creating multiple targets. Morrison, Reynolds, and Hakim entered the flooded passage that led toward the industrial district. The water was chest-deep and moving fast, carrying debris and chemicals that burned their eyes and throats. The tunnel ceiling was cracked and sagging, with sections that looked ready to collapse at any moment. "The structural damage is from bombing runs 2 years ago," Hakim explained as they waded through the rushing water. "Most people believe this passage is completely blocked, but there's a narrow channel that remains passable if you know exactly where to look." Behind them, Morrison could hear their pursuers entering the tunnel system. The contractors were methodical and professional, checking every passage and maintaining constant communication. But they were also overconfident, assuming that superior numbers and technology would be enough to corner their prey. Reynolds had other ideas. As they moved through the dangerous passage, he began setting improvised charges using materials from their equipment packs. "We're going to collapse sections of the tunnel behind us," he explained. "Not enough to flood the entire system, but enough to slow them down and force them to find alternate routes." The first explosion echoed through the tunnel network 20 minutes after they triggered it. Morrison heard shouts of confusion and anger from their pursuers, along with the sound of rushing water as drainage patterns shifted throughout the underground system. Chen's voice crackled through Morrison's radio with a status update. "We've reached the first checkpoint. No pursuit detected on our route, but we're seeing increased activity above ground. They're bringing in helicopters and additional vehicles." Morrison acknowledged the transmission while navigating a particularly treacherous section where the tunnel ceiling had partially collapsed. Sharp concrete debris hung like stalactites, ready to fall at the slightest vibration. Hakim moved through the obstacle course with practiced ease, showing them safe handholds and secure footing. "How did you learn to navigate these passages so well?" Morrison asked as they squeezed through a gap between fallen concrete slabs. "My brother worked on the original construction 20 years ago," Hakim replied. "He taught me the layout before he was killed in an airstrike that was supposed to target a weapons facility. We later learned the coordinates had been sold to your enemies, who used them to eliminate civilian infrastructure workers instead." Morrison felt the weight of that revelation. Every piece of information that had been sold to enemies had resulted in real deaths, real families destroyed. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, and the human cost was beyond calculation. Reynolds triggered another explosive charge, this one bringing down a larger section of tunnel behind them. The sound of the collapse was followed by silence from their pursuers. Either they had been forced to find alternate routes, or worse, some of them had been caught in the destruction. "Contact ahead," Hakim whispered, pointing toward lights moving in the tunnel ahead of them. Somehow another team of contractors had anticipated their route and positioned themselves to cut off their escape. Morrison realized they were facing a classic military pincer movement, enemies behind them and enemies ahead, with no clear avenue of retreat. But Reynolds had one more surprise in his tactical arsenal. "There's a maintenance shaft about 50 meters ahead," Reynolds said, consulting his mental map of the facility. "It leads up to the surface through the old pumping station. The access is hidden and not on any official blueprints." They moved carefully toward the position, staying low in the water and using debris for concealment. The contractors ahead were professional, but focused on the main tunnel passage. They weren't expecting anyone to use the maintenance access that most people didn't know existed. Chen's voice came through the radio again, this time with urgent news. "Sir, we've made contact with the extraction team, but they're reporting that the entire operation has been blown. Someone leaked the extraction plan. They're aborting and going to alternate protocols." Morrison felt his stomach drop. Even their escape route had been compromised, which meant the conspiracy had intelligence sources they hadn't identified. Someone with access to the highest levels of operation planning was still feeding information to the enemy. Reynolds found the hidden maintenance shaft and began working to open the access panel. "This changes everything," he said grimly. "If they knew about the extraction plan, they know about everything. We're on our own now." The sound of approaching forces echoed from both directions as Morrison realized they were about to face the most dangerous phase of their mission. Getting to the surface was only the beginning. Now they had to evade a massive manhunt while finding a way to deliver their evidence to someone they could trust. Above ground, the sound of helicopters and vehicles suggested that their enemies had unlimited resources and no intention of allowing any witnesses to survive. The legend that was Master Chief Reynolds was about to face his greatest test, and Morrison was beginning to understand why some legends are born from impossible situations. The maintenance shaft led to an abandoned pumping station that hadn't been operational for years. Morrison, Reynolds, and Hakim emerged into a concrete chamber filled with rusted machinery and broken pipes. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the damaged roof, and the sound of helicopters circling overhead told them their window of opportunity was closing fast. Reynolds activated a backup communication device that operated on civilian frequencies rather than military channels. After several attempts, He made contact with an investigative journalist in Washington who had been waiting for this information for months. Package confirmed. Reynolds spoke in careful code. Multiple items verified authenticity. Delivery required through alternate channels due to compromise of primary route. The response indicated that arrangements were being made for emergency extraction through international aid organizations operating in the region, but they needed to reach a specific location within the next 6 hours before the entire area was locked down by military contractors claiming counterterrorism authority. Chen's voice crackled through Morrison's radio with devastating news. "Sir, Santos has been captured. I managed to escape with the primary evidence, but they have her and they're using her to try to track my position." Morrison felt rage building inside him. Santos was more than a team member, she was family, and the thought of her in enemy hands made him want to abandon caution and launch a direct assault. But Reynolds placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We get the evidence to safety first," Reynolds said firmly. "Then we come back for Santos. If we're captured now, everything she sacrificed will be meaningless." Hakim had been monitoring local communication channels and reported that the contractors were systematically searching every building and tunnel entrance in the area. They had unlimited authority from corrupt officials and were using counterterrorism protocols to justify anything they deemed necessary. "We need transportation," Morrison said, studying the industrial landscape around the pumping station. Most of the vehicles in the area would be monitored or controlled by their enemies, but Hakim had contacts throughout the civilian population. "My cousin operates a medical supply truck," Hakim said. "He makes deliveries to refugee camps outside the city. The contractors won't stop humanitarian vehicles without causing international incidents." Reynolds was studying intelligence data on his backup device when he made a discovery that changed their entire understanding of the situation. "Morrison, look at this. The financial records show payments going back 3 years, but the amounts increased dramatically 6 months ago. Something big is planned, something that requires eliminating all witnesses to the previous operations." Morrison examined the data and felt a chill of recognition. The timeline corresponded with a major offensive operation that was scheduled to begin next week. Someone was planning to use sold intelligence to set up American forces for a massive defeat, then blame the failure on operational security rather than betrayal. "How many soldiers are we talking about?" Morrison asked. "Potentially thousands," Reynolds replied grimly. "Multiple bases, coordinated attacks, complete tactical surprise because the enemy will know every detail of our plans in advance." Chen's voice came through the radio again, this time with hope mixed with desperation. "Sir, I've made contact with the extraction team through alternate channels. They can reach us, but only if we can get to the old airfield outside the city within 4 hours." Hakim's cousin arrived at the pumping station driving a truck marked with international medical symbols. The vehicle was loaded with legitimate medical supplies destined for refugee camps, providing perfect cover for their movement through the city. As they prepared to leave, Morrison made radio contact with his command structure for the first time since entering the underground complex. The response he received confirmed his worst fears. Colonel Martinez had reported his entire team as missing in action and was already preparing replacement operations based on the assumption that their mission had failed. "She's moving fast to cover her tracks," Reynolds observed. "If we're officially dead, no one will question why we never returned, and any evidence we might have gathered becomes irrelevant." The trip through the city was tense, but successful. Hakim's cousin navigated checkpoint after checkpoint with the casual confidence of someone who made the same route regularly. The medical supplies and humanitarian mission provided perfect cover, and the contractors focused their searches on military vehicles and suspicious civilian traffic. As they approached the old airfield, Morrison could see a small civilian aircraft waiting on the damaged runway. But he also spotted vehicles that didn't belong, black SUVs positioned to watch the airfield approaches. "They're here," Morrison said, studying the tactical situation through binoculars. "Someone leaked the extraction plan to them." Reynolds smiled grimly and pulled out a device Morrison didn't recognize. "Actually, I leaked the extraction plan to them. Through channels I knew were compromised. While they're watching this airfield, the real extraction is happening at a different location entirely. The decoy operation worked perfectly. As Morrison's team slipped away from the monitored airfield, they could see the contractors maintaining their surveillance on an empty airplane that would never take off. Meanwhile, the real extraction team was waiting at a humanitarian aid station where international observers provided diplomatic protection. 6 hours later, Morrison found himself on a civilian cargo plane bound for Germany, carrying evidence that would expose one of the largest military corruption scandals in American history. Reynolds sat across from him, looking older and more tired than Morrison had ever seen him, but alive and determined to see justice done. "What about Santos?" Morrison asked, as the plane gained altitude. "We'll get her back," Reynolds promised. "But first we make sure this evidence reaches people who can act on it. The conspiracy dies today and everyone responsible will face justice." Below them, the landscape of war and betrayal faded into distance, but Morrison knew their real mission was just beginning. The legend of Master Chief Reynolds had been proven true. He was indeed still alive, still fighting, and still dedicated to protecting the people who depended on him to bring them home safely.